Welcome to DMM Downloads. We are podcasting another conversation about DMM between Jeff Crabtree and me, Rudy Rivera. Jeff and I are teamed together in Northern Colorado in a ministry we call DMM NOCO. DMM NOCO is unleashing disciple-making movements in Northern Colorado, and we thought it a good idea to start a podcast as a way to bring awareness and resourcing to ordinary people who are passionate about making multiplying disciple makers in our natural networks. Thanks for joining us in this journey. We hope you get a DMM download from this conversation. Well, hey, Jeff.
Rudy, how are you?
I'm doing great. We're here for another DMM download podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's been a good morning so far. Jeff, you and I, as you know, we were just meeting with another friend, Roger, here in Fort Collins area, talking about disciple-making movements, and we're going to continue that today here on the podcast. Specifically, we said a few weeks ago at the beginning of the new year, we wanted to talk about habits, and specifically the habits of a multiplying disciple material, going through the habits, and we are now on habit 6, which is assemble. And so we're going to try to unpack that here in the next couple of minutes. Wanted to throw it towards Jeff and kind of say, talk to us about this habit, Jeff, as we're trying to build habits, form habits, be habits, do habits.
Yeah, again, the whole idea of habits, that habits create your results. And if you want different results, then oftentimes you need to evaluate and change your habits. Mm-hmm. So as disciple makers, leaning into disciple-making movements, DMM, like you said, we're on our 6th element or principle. And in our training, it's called assemble. Mm-hmm. And basically, it leans into the idea of what is church? Mm-hmm. Which is a pretty big question for even those of us that were, quote, professional clergy and maybe still involved in what we'd call the traditional or legacy or attractional church. Mm-hmm. We have an idea. So in our training, remember that we start out with the heart of God. We lean into movement prayer. We begin to engage, step into lostness. We look for persons of peace that are open, invite them into a discovery process. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon you've got a handful of people who are leaning into the scriptures, seeking how to obey what God says in that. And then pretty soon after a period of time, we think that in lots of cases, that gathering of a few, whether it be 3 or 5 or 8 or 12, pretty soon they want and need to be named together, to really be committed to one another. We could maybe call it really life-on-life community. And when they begin to do that, we believe that that could be the launching of a church. So that becomes a little bit challenging, Rudy, in a world that looks at church as a building, professional clergy, professional staff, programming, Sunday morning. And so anytime we start talking about looking at church from a different paradigm than that, at least for me, that was out of bounds or scary or keep it at arm's distance or maybe even call it wrong or radical or let's not touch it. So this whole principle of assemble is, how does God link together people who are involved in obedience-based discipleship with a view towards making other disciples who make other disciples and thus creating multiplication? Does that create a little bit of framework or foundation that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Can you maybe put it a little bit more in terms of it being a habit, so something that you do over and over and over again? Can you give an example of how a habit of assemble is maybe a different way of looking at church? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think we all get into habits, and I think for those who are involved in church as we know it. You have a habit called Sunday morning. You don't really even think about anything else. Sunday morning is the time you get up and whatever you do, have breakfast or whatever, and if you got young kids, get the kids together, and you go off to church, which is a habit, going to church. What we're looking at from learning from others around the world that are doing movement, looking at the New Testament, looking at vibrancy of community, is instead of going to church, you become the church, you are the church. So you regularly have a habit of getting together, but maybe not going to a building, but you gather together maybe in a home or, we say we have some people that have a discovery group even at their work, that then it launches to, let's go to a deeper level where we really are committed to living life on life in community. So we're being the church outside of what might be considered the traditional church model.
Yeah, great. That's really well said. Do you have any, trying to think, like what else would you say about church? Like we talked about this last week, we're kind of asking the question, what is the church? I mean, when we talk about this habit, is that a fair, simple way to say it?
Yeah, I think so. One, we're not trying to bash or be negative to the institution of church as we know it in Western culture. You and I have spent our lives in that. And so we're not trying to be negative of that, but we see some inadequacies or some areas that we could work on. Let's say, for instance, we call it the one another ministries or the one another commands in the New Testament. And we all kind of know about that, and we can argue over is there 27 or 30 or 32, and everybody has a little different perspective. The point is, in our habit of going on Sunday morning to church or even to being involved in a life group, that might be a little closer, but it's usually not life on life. It's really not leaning into what we would think is a New Testament model of really one another ministry. And so I think in DMM, disciple-making movements, when a discovery group grows or merges into a place where they really want to do life on life and have the habit of living life together, that's where this whole idea of assemble or the creation of church comes into play. Does that seem to answer a little bit of that?
I think so. And so that makes me wonder, for anybody listening, maybe you're wondering the same thing, what is the difference between an assembly or an ecclesia, a church, from, let's say, just a discovery Bible study?
Yeah, good point. Discovery Bible Study, as we've talked on the podcast so far, is leaning in to get people that are interested into learning what the scriptures have to say about life and then applying that in their own personal lives. But it really doesn't talk about the collective community as much. And so when a Discovery Bible Study gets some foundation and it begins to grow and develop, at some point there's a deeper commitment than just being in a discovery study where you're all individually learning about God and trying to apply that. You're now beginning to do it not from an individual point of view, but as a collective community of people that are wanting to live that out. So you're making deeper commitments, like in a church that, hey, we want to live life together. We're committed to doing one another. We are making a commitment to eat together and bear one another's burdens and meet regularly and give and be missional together. So it's a deeper level of commitment and community than we often see in a DBS.
Okay, you're kind of starting to use language of church there, like you were saying, right? So which is what we're talking about. Is there a minimum sort of entry level or minimum criteria for what an assembly would be? And I think the answer is yeah. I'm assuming you're going to say yes, maybe not. So I'll look forward to what you're saying. But when you're thinking about, anybody listening, maybe you have a framework of the Western church in your mind, traditional legacy church. We're talking a little bit different here today, and I'm curious if you have like a minimum requirements.
Yeah, I wish the faith was more about scientific data than an art. Anytime God is interfacing his people and community and the development of ecclesia or assembly or church, it's not scientific. But I think that obviously when we see a discovery group get going, whether that's 2, 3, up to maybe 12, maybe people stretch it to 15 or more. And again, those are not hard fact numbers. That it's more about what's God doing in those people in the sense that they want to make a commitment together to live out the faith in a deeper dimension than they do in just a discovery. So I think, that could happen with 3 or 5 and then it can grow and develop. But we would say that it would be more, you want to limit it to a number like 8, 10, 12, something like that, 13, where you could really live life on life. Otherwise, it gets too big, too broad, and it becomes a little bit more organizational than community oriented.
Okay, this may be you can decline to answer this question.
Man, you got me nervous now.
Yeah. So years ago, I've been pastoring for a long time, and every church that I've been a part of that I can recall has had something to the effect of a life group, a small group, a D group, call them different things. If you're listening and you're in church, you probably have some version of that group. Can you speak to what we're talking about today, the habit of assemble, ecclesia?
Right.
And I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit more too, by the way, that word and kind of what we're talking about. But I've heard it more times than I can count from the pulpit on a Sunday morning by a lead pastor or preaching pastor. Hey, we've got this thing that we do, but we also have small groups.
Right.
Because that's where, fill in the blank, life happens on life. That's where community really happens. That's where we can live out the faith together. So basically, to break it down simply in my world, I would say every pastor knows the big gathering on Sunday morning does not achieve what we're trying to achieve, life on life, real faith being lived out. So we create these things called life groups. Why would we not just call them ecclesias? Why would we not go down the road of, we don't have life groups, we have churches? Okay, so that's the question you can decline to answer.
Yeah, I don't know if I could answer that question for everybody. I could
That's
share
fair.
out of my experience that obviously in being in traditional ministry now, I think I'm getting ready to enter my 47th year, so don't think I'm a novice. And I did all of that. We had the big gatherings, and then we invited people into smaller groups or life groups or Bible studies. And I think that's good. I certainly won't knock that. But from my experience, it did make it smaller. It did make it a little more relational, but I don't know that it was life on life. Especially in a Western culture, people drive in from 5 minutes away to 20 minutes away and come to a life group. And usually it's centered around, sometimes it's relational, but a lot of times it's about a theme or studying the Bible together. And so you spend that hour and a half, or 2 hours a week, which is really good, which you can't get on a Sunday morning. But it's not necessarily, we didn't see that it was community, where you're really life on life, that you're meeting with people that are in your own neighborhood or that you work with, that you see regular, and you say, we really want to live this thing called the faith out in a more practical way. It's simply, again, going to another, not wrong, going to another activity, another gathering that might be smaller, but it didn't mean that you really bore each other's burdens in the sense that you go across the street and you share with each other a variety of things. So I don't know if that brings distinction, but I think this is another deeper level of living out the faith that I don't think that just life groups or small groups totally accomplish.
Okay.
Did I totally miss you on that one? Or
No,
yeah, I didn't answer the question for everybody, but I did try to lean in a little broader.
Yeah, well, and it's hard to answer for everyone. To your point, I think I'm trying to press on the idea of what distinguishes what we're talking about from, let's say, Sunday morning. We've kind of already addressed that a
Correct.
little bit, but also even our typical what we would call D group, life group, what small group, whatever they are in churches. So maybe that gets to the question I'd love for you to unpack. What are we talking about with ecclesia? What
Yeah.
does this thing? You keep using the word a commitment, which is a great word, but can you unpack that even a little bit more, or even describe what are the distinguishing characteristics of an ecclesia or an assembly when we're talking about these habits?
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. First of all, the whole idea of pulling apart what does community actually mean, and how do we see biblical community, and are we finding that in the organization of the church as we know it in larger settings, Sunday morning, or even life groups or Bible studies. So one would be community. The second thing is, which I don't know that everybody sees, that most of the things that we would call church membership or church activities or church dynamics, everything can be done in the large group, can be done in the small group. Teaching, fellowship, communion, baptism, tithing, missions. So we're just saying that in the smaller level, you can accomplish some of the same things. But here's the big thing, Rudy, I think, is that so oftentimes we miss being missional and on mission and stepping into lostness. And so obviously the whole idea of assemble or ecclesia, or could we call it even house church or home church or simple church or organic church, that there is a element in there that can multiply or can move beyond you to establish other ecclesias or assemble a lot more quicker, a lot more relatable, and a lot less expensive than going and planting a church where you have to have a full-time salary, you have to have money for facility, you've got to buy equipment. This is more organic in nature, and so it can spread and move away from you much easier and quicker than the model that we've been used to that we call church. Does that seem to make some sense?
It does to me, and I can tell you, having kind of become a practitioner of the habits. We were talking about this morning, but trying to lean into practicing the habits. My mindset has shifted from what church looks like, even I would say even house church looks like, in terms of the invitation to come and participate versus pushing it away to you gather and participate with your people, your natural network, instead of unnatural network, drive across town and be a part of my church kind of thing.
Right.
That's like a small paradigm shift that for me, that has maybe distinguished this habit of a symbol for me. Even a couple of years ago, I would have said, well, even a house church, well, yeah, we're just trying to get as many people into my home as we can.
Sure.
That's shifted in my mind. But enough about me. Maybe closing out here in the next minute or two. Do you have anything else you'd want to say?
Yeah, I think that we want to keep in mind, Rudy, that DMM, Disciple Making Movements, is focused a lot and prioritized in reaching the lost. And whether I like it or not, and I don't like it, but that the culture's changed in Western humanity, Western culture, that when I was doing ministry at other times in my life, people were coming to church buildings, and there didn't seem to be a sediment of such negativity or even hostility against the church. But we live in a culture, at least from my perspective, and I think others would confess, that among the lost, when you talk about church buildings or church staff or church organizations, they tend to resist that. And so we're just leveraging the reality that being in the lost world, they may not come to our buildings, but that doesn't mean they're opposed to our faith or Jesus or life on life. They may be wanting and need that. They just have this resistance to church as we know it. So we keep that in mind when we're thinking about launching ecclesias and assemblies and churches, is that we're trying to reach lost people, not Christian people per se.
Yeah, well said, Jeff. Thanks for this download. It's super helpful for me.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thanks, Jeff, for that engaging download. In DMM, we like to say that disciples are learners. I know I'm learning a lot from my conversations with you, Jeff. From all of us in DMM NoCo, we hope you got a DMM download from the conversation today. Don't forget to leave this podcast a review wherever you are listening online. If you found this conversation helpful, please head over to our site, dmmnoco.com, where you can find more content for your DMM journey, including a self-paced Habits of a Multiplying Disciple course. The course is designed to give you practical next steps to becoming a DMM practitioner and multiplying disciple maker. You can take that course for free at dmmnoco.com. We will be back next week with another engaging DMM download episode. Until then, may you hear from God through His Spirit and take simple steps of obedience in what you hear.